Our cruise aboard P&O's Aurora in May 2022 sailed from Southampton, visiting La Coruña, Vigo and Ceuta in Spain, then Valetta in Malta, followed by Messina in Sicily, Salerno and Civitavecchia in Italy, Ajaccio in Corsica, Alicante in Spain, and finally Lisbon in Portugal, before returning to Southampton. The quayside at Southampton was a hive of activity as they loaded the last of the food and luggage onto the ship, before we sailed out past the Isle of Wight ferry, with a few hardy passengers watching from the stern. Our route took us down the Solent, passing the Royal Victoria Park, and out into the Channel. The first day was at sea, so let's take a look around the ship. Up top there's a covered swimming pool with a couple of jacuzzis. In front of this you can get ice cream, pizzas, hot dogs or burgers. And beyond that is the open air pool. Even higher, near the funnel, is the games area, with sports courts and deck games. Oops. Right at the stern is a plunge pool and more jacuzzis. Migrating birds like to hitch a ride on ships, though we were going in the wrong direction for spring. There are many seating areas and bars leading to the atrium. In this 3-storey space there are shops selling jewellery, clothes and perfume, the future cruise and excursion desks and reception. There's an extensive library on board as well. For a sophisticated evening, there's Anderson's Bar, or the Crow's Nest with a cocktail pianist. There's an art gallery and sales just next to the casino. Dance classes and shows take place in Carmen's. And quizzes in Champions.
So which Marks & Spencer founder had the first name Thomas? Moving on to question 6. Now Waterstones is the UK's #1 what?
The Horizon Buffet restaurant serves food nearly 24/7. The main restaurants are open for breakfast, lunch and dinner. The Curzon Theatre is used for lectures during the day and shows in the evenings. La Coruña sits on the northwest tip of Spain and is an easy town to wander around on your own. The ship moored almost in the middle of town and we set off to walk around the marina. This area has been made into a small park with fountains and sculptures. The castle of Santo Anton stands at the mouth of the harbour. Just behind the castle is a terraced garden. The San Franciscan chapel sits behind the ruins of the old convent of San Francisco. Near the top of the garden in the medieval quarter is Santo Domingo Square and the monastery and church of Santo Domingo, which was reconstructed around 1775. Continuing through the square, we came to the monastery of Santa Barbara, part of the Order of St. Clare, often referred to as the Poor Clares. Still in the medieval quarter is the Collegiate Church of Santa Maria del Campo. The reason behind the name is that when it was built at the end of the 13th century, it was in the fields outside the city walls. The white rendered section shows where it was extended in the 19th century. Down a little side street we glimpsed a golden cupola on top of the building. The top street led to a viewpoint over the building and Maria Pita Square below. The easiest way down to the square is to take the lift. Otherwise you can climb down the steep staircase. This colonnaded square is at the heart of the old town. It was Saturday and there was lots of entertainment going on. We don't know what it was about, but it was fun. The imposing municipal palace, the one with the cupolas, stands at the top of the square. Saturday is the most popular day for weddings, and we were just in time to see a bride and groom coming out. The square is full of shops and cafes, so it was a perfect time to stop for coffee. After coffee, we wandered through the shopping streets, where a busker was playing Galician bagpipes. Back on the ship we could see some of the Galleria-style buildings with the characteristic glazed window balconies, which give the harbour area the name Crystal City. We then sailed out of the harbour, passing the fortress and the Children's Sailing Club. Our last sight of La Coruña as we continued our cruise was the Roman Tower of Hercules, the oldest lighthouse in the world. After an overnight cruise from La Coruña, Aurora sailed into the harbour of Vigo, Spain's busiest fishing port on the rugged west coast of the province of Galicia. The dock is in the bustling marina area. We didn't understand this statue, but it appears to have done a face plant on the promenade. We spent some time watching the kids' sailing club. They look pretty proficient, don't they? See that big hill in the distance? Well, that's where we went next. It's called Monte De Gaya, and there are views from here over the whole of Vigo Bay. It's topped by a hermitage, which is popular for weddings. From here we were driven to Bayona La Real, where we went to the former fortress of Monte Real, which is now a parador, a government-run hotel. Because it was built to defend the town, the battlements look out over the bay and the 3 islands that protect the entrance from the Atlantic Ocean. We continued up the hill to the parador itself. Here we had even better views over the bay. We all went into the building for a mid-morning snack of tapas with coffee or wine. After a last look over the bay, we walked through the gates and down the drive, passing the 11th to 17th century battlements and gardens on the way. We then went past the beach and into the old town. First stop was outside the 16th century convent with its magnificent altar. Passing the town hall, we came to the Misericord Chapel, where there are lots of statues, one of which, Christ on the Cross, is hollow and was used to smuggle gold into the country. We then wandered through the pedestrianised streets where there are shops, bars and restaurants. We walked back up the promenade past the harbour, where there's a replica of the Pinto, one of the fleet in which Christopher Columbus discovered America. We all gathered at the fortress entrance to wait for the bus. Whilst we were waiting, we had a look at the park.
This time of the year is perfect.
The bus then took us along the coast road, passing the 3 islands and lovely beaches, until we got back to Vigo and the ship.
Those are clean waters. Are rented for the people.
We sailed out of the bay in the evening on our way to Ceuta. On the northwest tip of Africa, just opposite Gibraltar, is the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. Here we got on a coach for an introductory tour of the peninsula, which juts out into the Mediterranean Sea and is bordered by Morocco. From the viewpoint at Monte Ajaccio, we could see down into the port, which is built round a natural harbour. Here is the San Antonio Hermitage, a tiny chapel. From the chapel you can see Gibraltar across the strait. We then went down into the town to the Mediterranean Maritime Park. This is a complex of freeform saltwater swimming pools, landscaped gardens and restaurants. It had been closed during the COVID epidemic and was now being spruced up for the summer season. We could see the ship in the port from here as well. Next we went into the town centre to see the royal city walls. These impressive fortified defences were begun in the 1540s. Inside the walls is a large square which is used for exhibitions, and there was a jobs fair going on when we were there. The walls were important during the sieges of Ceuta by the Moors between 1694 and 1791. During the Napoleonic War, it was a garrison for British troops allied with Spain. There are 2 sets of walls, separated by a ditch filled with seawater. The next stop was at Africa Square, where the blue flowers of the jacaranda were in full bloom. In the corner of the square is the Cathedral of Santa Maria, which stands on the site of the Great Mosque. Inside is a Baroque altarpiece. The town hall is on the opposite side of the square. The main street is pedestrianised with plants and fountains down the middle and colonnaded shops down the side. Ceuta is a tax and duty-free town, so many of the shops sell electronics, alcohol and high-end perfumes. There are squares off the street with more plants, fountains and outdoor cafes. The building in the far corner of this square is called the Dragon House, for obvious reasons. Then we went down to the promenade, where we walked past yet more fountains. There were also a number of statues, this one being Hercules. This gull was nesting on a lamppost near the marina, where we caught the shuttle bus back to the ship. That evening, the tugs helped us out of the harbour and into the Mediterranean. It takes 2 days to sail from Ceuta to Malta, and we arrived in Valetta early in the morning. We made our way to the ferry which goes from Valetta to the 3 cities of Villajoyosa, Sanglia and Corsica, which nowadays merge to form a single city on the opposite side of the Grand Harbour from Valetta. The boat dropped us by the airship sculpture near the American University. In the distance we saw a little road train called the Happy Train and decided to go for a ride round the area. Over the centuries, Malta's strategic position has attracted invaders from all points of the compass, and they have left behind everything from prehistoric temples, palaces and churches to massive fortifications, all packed into a rocky, barren-looking island smaller than the Isle of Wight. The train dropped us back in the marina. Here we looked at the boats. We saw one of the little rowing ferries, then looked up to see our ferry coming in. We dipped round and hopped on it to go back to Valetta. Leaving the ferry, we took the lift up to the centre of Valetta. If you're a pensioner, a combined boat and lift ticket costs 90 cents, but the lift alone costs €1. At the top of the lift is the upper Baracca garden, with views over the whole of the Grand Harbour, including the 3 cities. Walking through the garden, we came to the Prime Minister's office. From here we went down Merchant Street, one of the 2 main pedestrian streets, where the shops and houses have enclosed balconies. Little alleyways connect the streets, and the only traffic is the electric hop-on hop-off bus. Republic Street is lined with squares, shops, restaurants and craft stalls. At the end is the Royal Opera House Open Air Theatre. It then leads through the city gates to Hastings Gardens in the old fortifications. Finally, there's the Triton Fountain. Back inside the walls is the Parliament building. We return to the Baracca Gardens, looking out over the fortifications and the lift. The gardens are a peaceful respite from the bustle of the city. Just before 4 o'clock, we joined hundreds of people who gathered above the saluting battery to witness the firing of the evening gun. After this, we returned to the ship to sail to Messina. Messina is the Sicilian port closest to mainland Italy. Having toured Sicily before, we decided to spend the day exploring this beautiful port city on our own. Passing Celebrity Beyond, which we named Beyond All Reason, we went into the square in front of the town hall. We then walked along the main street and saw the cupola of the Temple of Christ the King high above. Then we passed the Victor Emmanuel Theatre, where they have plays, musicals and ballet. From here we cut through to the coast road and looked back towards Aurora before continuing to the promenade, which looks out over the harbour and the statue of the Golden Madonna. Further along is the Fountain of Neptune, carved in 1557. It stands in front of the prefecture building, and above it we could again see the Christ the King temple. Heading to the park on the harbour edge, we saw this little girl learning to roller skate with the help of her dad. Whoa! Turning back, we went slightly inland, passing the Pine Cone Fountain and a fishmonger's shop. On a large roundabout is the Victor Emmanuel III Art Gallery. Just beyond this is the Duomo, a 12th century Norman cathedral with an astronomical clock built into the bell tower. Crowds gather just before midday to watch and listen to the spectacular performance of the Campanile. The lion and cockerel are followed by a parade of saints, as a recording of Ave Maria is played. The astronomical clock, made in 1933, is the largest in the world and shows the planetary system, days of the week, and the ages of man. The cathedral was almost destroyed in the earthquake of 1908, and incendiary bombs fell on the restored roof in 1943, destroying much of the interior. This is one of the stops for the hop-on, hop-off road train and carriage rides. Down the side of the cathedral are statues and quiet cafes. Behind are the 11th century ruins of the church of St. James the Apostle. Just across the street is the cafe where we had a well-deserved drink before returning to the ship to sail to Salerno. Aurora sailed from Messina to Salerno overnight, arriving in the Gulf of Salerno early in the morning. As soon as we docked in Salerno harbour, we disembarked to go on a boat trip along the Amalfi Coast, where face masks were required.
You want me to smile?
We'd been to Amalfi before, but always by road, so it was lovely to sail along the coastline, seeing all the little villages, some clinging to the hillside and others lining the water's edge.
Villages in all Italy that are allowed to take in Amalfi, especially regarding the meeting time and the meeting point. Just because, as you said,
we passed olive groves and vineyards set among the limestone cliffs, with sea caves at the bottom. There's a lighthouse perched precariously on a ledge overlooking the sea. This castle once featured in a Bond movie.
And you can see with the modern builds at the end of the 50s, we had
Finally, we came to Amalfi, where we were to spend a few hours. The crew dropped the anchor and we left the boat moored in the harbour under the impressive cliffs. The town is dominated by the tower of the Cathedral of St Andrew. Everybody makes for the square, from which a flight of 60 steps leads up to the cathedral entrance. The interior of the cathedral dates back to the 13th century. The town, which is set at the mouth of a deep gorge, is filled with narrow streets lined with shops selling local specialities. Some of the streets run underneath the buildings, and steep flights of steps lead to higher levels. There are tiny squares with fountains, courtyards and cafes. Some souvenirs are less subtle than others. We came back out of the centre and looking up saw the vertical cemetery high on the hill. We had half an hour before we were due back on the boat, and we spent it wandering around the harbour and beach area, watching the activities of both holidaymakers and locals. We then got back on the boat to sail back to Salerno and the ship. From the deck we could see the medieval Arecchi castle on the hill 300 metres above the town as we left port to sail to Civitavecchia. Civitavecchia is best known as the port for Rome, 50 miles to the southeast, but we decided to be different. Having heard of a place called Civita de Bagnoregio, 53 miles north of Civitavecchia, we went on a tour to see it for ourselves. We passed through olive groves and vineyards as the coach took us through the countryside. When we arrived in Bagnoregio village, we transferred to a minibus, which took us to the edge of a deep canyon. In the middle of the canyon, teetering high on a rock stack, stands the old medieval city. The only access is by a long footbridge, as the original road across the clay rock has eroded away. Indeed, the entire rock stack is eroding, giving rise to the name the Dying Town. The only vehicles allowed on the bridge are motorbikes and mini-trucks. After a final pull up a steep slope, we came to the entrance, which is through the facade of an old church, which has already collapsed due to erosion. Although it's called Dying, it has 750,000 visitors a year, but a population of only 17. In the main square is the church of San Donato. The town dates from the Etruscan period, more than 2,500 years ago, and the streets are laid out in the grid pattern typical of this period. Many of the old houses are now holiday lets.
For example, is very nice.
At the end of the main street is the Poet's Garden. Entrance is free if you buy something from the little shop, or if you're part of an organised tour. This attractive garden was made on the site of an old monastery. It overlooks the valley where the different types of rock have eroded at different speeds, leading to strange formations. No one escapes the COVID mask requirements. Back in the centre, we wandered along the winding cobbled streets and flower-decked lanes. Behind the church there's a small square where the walls are covered with climbing roses. From here we walked round the edge of town before returning across the bridge. We then took one last look back at this wonderful place before joining the group to return to the ship to sail to Corsica. Overnight, Aurora sailed from Civitavecchia to Ajaccio, capital of the French island of Corsica, the fourth largest island in the Mediterranean. The harbour is next to the marina in the heart of the city. Moored right next to us was the ultra-luxury Seabourn Ovation. We spent the morning exploring the city on our own, starting at the typically French market on the edge of the harbour. Next we went to Place Foch, where we saw the first of many statues of Napoleon Bonaparte, who was born in Ajaccio. Then we came to Place General de Gaulle, with its colonnades covered in bougainvillea and fancy lampposts. Originally a military training ground, it's said that this is where Napoleon got a taste for war whilst watching the soldiers on manoeuvres. This large and mainly empty square has a few trees, a bandstand and, guess what, another statue of Napoleon, this time mounted on horseback and surrounded by his 4 brothers. Close to the square is the Cathedral of the Assumption, where Napoleon was baptised. A short walk from the cathedral is the promenade. This runs alongside a sandy beach to the imposing citadel, which dates from 1492. It's open to the public, so we went in to look round. The citadel has seen many enlargements and reinforcements over the centuries. In the First World War, it was a registration and rallying point for the soldiers of Ajaccio before their departure for the front. There are lovely views from the walls, which are accessed by this steep staircase. Along the streets are wine bars with interesting tables and tempting restaurants. After lunch, we went on a trip into the interior. Corsica is a very rugged, mountainous island, and even in May there was snow on some of the peaks. We drove through vineyards, fragrant pine and oak forests and remote villages as we climbed the winding valley roads. Eventually we came to Villajoyosa, a village 900 metres up in the mountains, where we stopped for a true taste of Corsica. A mid-afternoon medley of smoked ham and sausages, goat's milk cheese, cake and wine. Then we continued through the mountains until we came to Boccognano in the regional natural park of Corsica. We stopped near this historic picture of the village school. The village is renowned for the purity of its water, the quality of the air and the superb mountain scenery. We went back down through the forests to return to the ship, where the Royal Clipper had moored alongside us. So, after another look at these 2 beautiful ships, we sailed on to Alicante in Spain. An overnight hop took Aurora from Ajaccio to Alicante on the Costa Blanca. We went straight to Villajoyosa to the Valor chocolate factory, founded by the Lopez family in 1881. We followed the guide into the museum, where they had a reproduction of the Aztec calendar stone and various Mexican artifacts, since that was where chocolate originated. Then we went to the next building to see some old machinery. These covered the entire production process, from receiving the raw cocoa beans to moulding the finished product into bars or individual chocolates. There's also a reproduction of the old family office. The next stop was at the viewing platform, where we could see the modern factory in action. Finally, of course, we went to the factory shop. From here we went into the old town of Villajoyosa. The narrow streets are lined with old fishermen's houses, all painted different colours, so the sailors could pick out their own house as they sailed home. Street signs are in both Castilian and Valencian. Off the plaza is the magnificent church of Santa Maria. Leaving the church, we were led through more narrow streets with small squares and fountains. Many of the houses had little balconies. The police station is tiny, as is the police motorbike outside. As we got lower down the hill, the squares got bigger. Passing the city walls, we came to the promenade. This runs along a golden sandy beach. A travelator took us up the hill to the Valor cafe. Here they were preparing typical Spanish churros, a sort of tube-shaped donut. These were cut into short lengths and served with hot melted chocolate.
This cafe was quite hot.
After looking out over the sea from the cafe, we got on the bus to drive to Altea. The old town is full of whitewashed houses in cobbled streets. The church has beautiful blue tiled domes. The church square often has a market, but always has lovely cafes. The narrow streets lead down to the town gates. We spent a little time wandering round the streets, looking at the houses and cafes. Eventually we came to a little square with an unusual sculpture and views over the sea and gardens filled with bougainvillea. In the distance we could see the tower blocks of Benidorm, which we then drove past as we returned to the ship in the shadow of Alicante Castle. It took Aurora 2 days to sail from Alicante to Lisbon. In the early hours of the morning she sailed into the River Tagus, under the 25th of April bridge, past the statue of Christ the Redeemer and into the cruise terminal. Here we boarded a coach which took us through the city centre, passing the Elevador and Roseo Square.
It goes back to 1902. R-O-S-S-E-O, Roseo is the name of the square. At least very useful for us too, because now beyond...
We then crossed the bridge and passed the statue we saw from the ship and drove through the vineyards at the foot of the Arabida Mountains.
Is the new place where the production takes place.
We went to the Jose Maria de Fonseca winery, the oldest in this famous winemaking region. We started in the visitor centre, where there were old barrels and an ancient bottling machine. Then we went up the steps into the pretty, tranquil gardens.
Until the mid-1970s. From here, there we have
The bamboo tunnel led to the cellars, where wine is aged in mahogany and oak barrels. The oak adds flavour, whilst the mahogany allows the wine to age. The family archive contains one barrel from every vintage ever produced. Then we went to the shop. Now comes the fun bit, tasting the muscatel and red wine produced here. There was also an opportunity to buy, so we did. Leaving the vineyard, we drove over the mist-clad mountains to the coastal city of Setúbal. This former fishing village was once famous for sardines. In the centre is the attractive Praça de Bocage. Named after the famous Portuguese poet Manuel Bocage, whose statue stands on a column in the middle of the square, it was once the site of an old Roman fish salting factory. Nearby is the world-famous Liveramento Market, decorated with tiles from the 1930s with scenes of fishing and farming. There are over 300 independent vendors, all housed under one roof. The fruit and veg were enormous and looked wonderful. The fish section was fascinating, with varieties we don't often see at home, these being razor clams. The heads were being chopped up to use in stews or for stock. Elsewhere there were squid and cuttlefish, skate and espada, crabs, cat shark and monkfish, all freshly prepared. Just beyond the dried fish stall we found the irresistible Portuguese custard tarts. We bought some and a box of red wine, then returned to the coach to drive back to Lisbon. Electric scooters are popular here, but riders need to be careful. We then drove back to the centre and once on the ship watched other trips returning. Then it was back down the Tagus and under the bridge with its permanent traffic roar for our 2-day sail back to Southampton.